What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, December 2nd, 2016. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And, of course, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. So let's get right into the news. The three-ring circus over the recounts is still continuing, is being fought back and forth. The latest news is the Attorney General of Michigan, Bill Schuette, has filed a lawsuit to block the recount demand, saying that Jill Stein doesn't really have any standing because a recount cannot change her outcome in this election. She can't claim aggrieved status, and she lacks standing. And, of course, he's pointing out, and we know this was part of the plan anyway, that if Michigan goes ahead with the recount, they will miss the Electoral College. That's what Hillary and Jill Stein are trying to do, is get Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin blocked from attending the Electoral College to narrow the gap, so that Hillary's bought and paid for, blackmailed, threatened electors can steal the White House for her. Now, the Trump campaign has gone into Michigan trying to block the recount and basically saying the same thing. She's not aggrieved, to the point where a potential miscounting of votes cost her the election. She had 1% of the vote in Michigan. And this, of course, is a valid point. Jill Stein, that's the name on the lawsuits. A recount cannot possibly alter her outcome. Of course, we know that Jill is acting as a front for Hillary Clinton. Hillary's probably offered Jill Stein a cabinet position or something to do all this. Meanwhile, over in Wisconsin, 2 PACs, Great America PAC and Stop Hillary PAC, have moved in Wisconsin's Western District Court for a temporary restraining order to bring that recount to an immediate halt. And the arguments are all pretty much the same. Jill Stein waited until the absolute last moment. In fact, she missed one of the deadlines in Pennsylvania, expressly to tangle up these states in legal wrangling so they cannot send their electors to the Electoral College. So this is already turning worse than Florida 2000. And remember, after that debacle, Florida 2000, what did the government promise? Oh, we're going to fix this system. We're never going to see this happen again. Well, here we are. Now, there is a story still unconfirmed that over in Pennsylvania, where they're doing a recount, somebody discovered 25,000 uncounted votes, all for Hillary Clinton. So that little cartoon I made with Hillary and the dolly was a little bit predictive on that one. Now, over in Wisconsin, a GOP lawmaker is out there saying basically this is a stall by the Democrats. They cannot complete the recount, and so Wisconsin will not be able to send their delegates to the Electoral College, and that's the plan all along. Wisconsin was won fairly by Donald Trump, and they're trying to basically jam it up so he can't have those electoral votes. Now then, is Hillary on her way to the White House? Actually, no, because there is a little-known provision inside Title III of the U.S. Constitution, which is where they describe the presidency and how the president is chosen. Because if the faithless electors flip the result of an election, Congress has the option to step on in. Now, everybody goes through the Electoral College and everything's pro forma, it's ritual, it's tradition, but on January 6th of next year, the newly elected Congress, heavily GOP, will meet to determine if the Electoral College vote was regularly given. In other words, that it's fair and above board. With all the talk about threats to the lives of the electors, obviously that's going to fail. Now, for most of the country's 57 past presidential elections, this vote has been ceremonial and ritual, but it doesn't have to be. If just one member of the House and one senator objects to the way that the Electoral College vote played out, for example, if a handful of electors hand the White House to Hillary Clinton, then the members of Congress can retreat to their chambers to vote on what to do about it. And if the House and Senate agree on a remedy for the Electoral College handing the White House to Hillary, their decision is final. The House and Senate can vote to say, we're going to go with the original electoral vote counts and put Donald Trump into the White House. Now, if the House and the Senate are unable to agree, then the dispute over the state electors goes to the executive of the state, meaning the state's Secretary of States, who would make the final call and would be under tremendous pressure to have the electors follow the vote of the state. This thing probably going to wind up in the Supreme Court. And they've just made a travesty of our democracy. They have underscored again that our election system is an absolute joke. It is intentionally designed to facilitate and conceal election fraud. And it's time to do something about it. Now, obviously, if Hillary steals the White House and risks a civil war doing so, they'll keep things exactly the same as they have been, because this is how the narcocracy's been hanging on to power for 30 years. If Trump takes his rightful place as President of the United States of America, we're going to have 2 years to mobilize and absolutely demand changes be made to the election system to make it easy to verify, easy to double-check, none of this nonsense about voting and everything from out of state. All of that's going to go away. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network here. Now, over in Nevada, there's a guy named Stan Vaughn. He was a candidate in Nevada's Assembly District 15. And he was kind of suspicious about all these vote-by-mail ballots coming on in. So he basically did a very simple experiment. He sent a personal letter of thanks and congratulations and whatever to some of these registrations of people who voted in the election. 85% of them were returned by the post office saying that that person didn't actually live there. I'm sorry, it's 92.5%. He just sent out letters. Most of them were returned. Almost all of them were returned. 92% of them were returned saying the person whose name appeared over that address on the voter registration did not live there. But somehow they still managed to vote. That's a 92.5% fraud voting rate in the vote-by-mail system. And needless to say, Hillary Clinton won Nevada by a thin margin. Our election system is a joke. It's an absolute joke. It's designed to keep the establishment in power and convince you that however badly the government abuses you, that somehow or other, this is what you voted for. So sit down and shut up and stop complaining about all the terrible things happening to our country. Now, over at Russia Today, they're running a story about how somebody set up a petition demanding the Electoral College put Hillary Clinton in the White House because she won the popular vote by at least 3 million illegal immigrants and 1.2 million dead people. And of course, with an online petition, those names could be just as phony as those vote-by-mail ballots out in Nevada. But if those names are real, they're in trouble. Because everyone who signed that petition is guilty of a conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government. Now, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump ran their campaigns by the rules they both agreed to play by going on in. Remember, during the primaries, Hillary kept saying it's the number of delegates that counts, not the popular vote. Because Bernie Sanders kept winning the popular vote, and somehow Hillary wound up getting all the delegates anyway. Now she's changed her tune. She didn't get the electors, but I won the popular vote. You stole the popular vote. We absolutely don't know how many people really did vote for Hillary Clinton. For all we know, it was a total of 6. And the rest are all fake. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Bob in Las Vegas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I used that joke you you mentioned yesterday about living to 101, then getting shot by a jealous husband. You got a great laugh. So thank you. You're not only brilliant, you've got a great sense of humor. So
that's the only thing that keeps me sort of kind of maybe sane.
Okay. You were going to the Electoral College. You mentioned 15 electors may have already defected.
That's a report out of InfoWars, and if Hillary's people can take Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan out of the Electoral College, 15, I think, is enough to swing it in her favor. Of course, there's an unknown factor, and that is Democratic electors who were Bernie Sanders supporters who can't bring themselves to vote for Hillary, and we don't know how many of those are out there.
Right. I think you mentioned, too, that there are laws in 20-some states against faithless electors, but what's to say outside of those states, what's to say more of these electors would defect to Hillary? What's to stop them from doing it?
Absolutely nothing. And even in those states where there are laws that compel the electors to go with their state's election results, the penalties are a wrist slap, like a $1,000 fine, that's it. I'm sure Soros will whip out his checkbook and cover that right now.
Exactly. Mike, you mentioned, just wanted to change the subject, you mentioned yesterday about Chernobyl and Fukushima, how Fukushima would have that permanent contamination of the land, and they'll be dealing with Chernobyl for the next 100 years. I'm just wondering, like, in the event of a nuclear war between U.S. and Russia, you mentioned that the elite come up out of their bunkers in 2 years. Is that right? Only 2 years?
Well, it depends on the specific weapons used, because how long the fallout stays radioactive is dependent upon what specific products come out of those bombs. Some of the isotopes are very short-lived, and they're going to be gone in just days. Others are a lot longer. There was talk, back in the days of the doomsday weapon about combining cobalt isotopes, which would just last for millions and millions of years. But it's going to be a mess, because if you have the proper laboratory equipment, you can still detect in the water and in the air isotopes from the Pacific nuclear tests the U.S. carried out. This stuff really never goes away. It gets weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. Over at Eniwetok, there's actually starting to open up where they blew up all those ships as a tourist attraction for skin divers, but there's still a limit on how long you can go down there.
Okay. Oh, and I too, I like that Tulsi Gabbard a lot. I mean, I'm in Vegas, but I follow her. I've been following her for the past few months, and I would have loved to have seen Trump name her as Secretary of State. And I kind of like Dana Rohrabacher as well, because he's been against this whole demonization of Russia.
Yeah, there are some good people out there, and that's something to keep in mind when all of Hillary's people are screaming that Donald Trump has failed his promise to drain the swamp. And again, it's easy to understand Donald Trump's appointments when you realize he's not approaching this from an ideological point of view. He's going for competency. He's going for people who know how to do the job he's going to tell them how to do, and that's what he's looking for. As far as Tulsi is concerned, I guess she's on her way right now up to the Dakota Access Pipeline protests to lend her voice there, but I think we're going to be hearing a lot about her in the coming years. She's clearly a political star on the rise.
I'd love to hear her on your show, but you were saying about Trump, and I agree with you, he wants to appoint people who are smarter than him, on certain subjects. That's why I don't think Romney would be a lousy choice because of his lack of experience in foreign policy.
I would agree, and I think Romney is being pushed on Trump by a lot of Trump supporters, and he's going through the motions. He's had the meeting, but as of the last word I got, Trump appears to be settling in on Petraeus, and that would clearly be a much better choice than Mitt Romney. I think the only reason Romney wants Secretary of State is he's thinking about coming back into the political ring in 2020.
Right. Okay. I just last want to say, as far as the Time Person of the Year, I'd like to nominate, if I could, the Syrian army collectively. So they're fighting for civilization. They're fighting for civilization against the evil represented by these U.S.-backed terrorists. So the Syrian army, I'd love to see them on the cover at time. It's never going to happen, but they should be. God bless these guys, all of them.
Well, they're fighting for their homes and loved ones they're right in front of their eyes, and that makes them very, very motivated. And I haven't looked over at the voting for Time Magazine's Man of the Year. Last I heard, Putin was winning by a wide margin.
I'm sure they'll give it to Hillary.
They probably will. Here, we made you Person of the Year. That's a consolation prize. And here's your participation trophy for the 2016 election.
Exactly. Oh, Mike, last thing. I wanted to get just a quick question. The movie Executive Action about the JFK killing.
Yes.
You know, was that done by Hollywood as a favor to the government? Because obviously the businessmen, these corporate guys, are the ones behind it. And there was one scene where one of the businessmen mentioned CIA or FBI, and his colleague immediately said, "Oh, of course not. They're not involved." Yeah, well, I mean, like it was just a put-up job, basically.
Well, I think the original script, because I remember when that came out, the original script was out there trying to do what Oliver Stone later did with JFK. But Hollywood is infiltrated by CIA, by FBI, and all the rest of that. And they did try and water it down. For one thing, the FBI literally has means of getting hold of scripts before they're actually shot to review and make sure there's nothing in there that makes the FBI look bad. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover was just a nut about Hollywood being a publicity servant of the U.S. government. It's what led to his war on Charlie Chaplin. And, any script that gets a little too close, there'll be some little back channel talk about you need to take this out, or we're going to find some way to interfere with your production. Certainly any film that is filmed on U.S. military assets, like Top Gun on the carriers and everything, those scripts have to conform exactly to what the U.S. government wants to be in them, or you're simply refused permission to shoot on the ships and bases and so forth and so on.
Okay. All right. Well, you and Claire, you guys have a nice weekend. Thanks.
We certainly will. Thank you very much here. We're going to let you go. Now then, apparently there was this little get-together yesterday of campaign workers for both the Clinton and Trump campaigns, sort of a post-mortem analysis, and it literally broke into a shouting match where Hillary's campaign people were screaming that Donald Trump was fueling racism to aid his campaign, which, of course, we know is complete nonsense. It was Soros and Hillary and Black Lives Matter that were trying to make racism an issue for the election in the hope that the black community would vote for Hillary Clinton. And actually, a lot of them did not. They voted for Trump. So did a lot of the legal Hispanics in this country voted for Donald Trump because they could see through it. There was one leader of Black Lives Matter just put it right in a nutshell. Hillary is saying all the things we want to hear, and we have no way of knowing she'll ever keep her word about any of it. Now, speaking of George Soros, he's out there screaming that the latest, most recent hate crimes are all the fault of Donald Trump, and he's pledged another $10 million for the opposition, whatever the opposition happens to be. I don't know, a hit team or something like that. But all the recent hate crimes are targeting Trump supporters and Trump voters. How can Soros justify the statement that this is all the fault of Donald Trump? Why? Because Donald Trump won the election? You know, Donald Trump made us be violent, therefore it's all his fault? I mean, it's just utterly, utterly ridiculous. We are getting word that Donald Trump is narrowing down his decision for a Supreme Court justice to replace Antonin Scalia. And it's down to just 3 or 4 people, all of whom have views similar to those held by Scalia. So whatever political advantage was the motive behind Scalia's assassination has just been erased. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. We're going to take a few commercials here, and we'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to the show. Now, a suggestion is being put on out. If Trump really wants to root out corruption and drain the swamp, one of the best places he could start would be a full and complete audit of the Department of Defense. because we've been hearing going all the way back to the day before 9/11 how the Defense Department is just misplacing $1 trillion or a couple of trillion here and there. And, you know, it's like no big deal that this money is going. $1 trillion, even today, with all the inflation, that's a lot of money. And they were trying to do an audit on 9/11, but the plane that hit the Pentagon flew around the Pentagon and came in from the other side and hit the offices where the auditors were working. How very lucky for whoever actually got that money. But it should be audited. So should the Federal Reserve. All right, we're going to take a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing much better, thank you.
Well, I hope you don't take this personally, but I want to be a little critical. This statement that you keep pushing from Henry Kissinger, his real statement said, military men are dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns for foreign policy.
I stand corrected. All right, I stand corrected. But you can
General Mathis, you know, this Mad Dog Mathis that now is the Defense Secretary, he's the guy when he was in charge of Afghanistan who said, it's fun, great fun shooting people. You know, are you seriously considering this man? Good gracious.
Well, it's not really up to me. Again, all of these people are going to be under the direction of Donald Trump, and if they don't do what Trump tells them, they'll be fired. So that's something everybody. That's something everybody needs to keep in mind. These people don't set policy. They can recommend, but they don't have the authority to go on out and start wars on their own. When Hillary Clinton was smuggling all those weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, she didn't act on her own. That's an absolute guarantee.
Well, tell that to Ashton Carter when he bombed the Syrian troops against Obama's intention. But anyway, I've got a message for General Mathis. And one of his statements was, engage your brain before engaging your weapon. And what I would suggest that he engages his brain before putting his mouth in gear.
Okay, well, sounds like a good recommendation for anybody, not just. It's a good advice for anybody, actually, to be very honest.
To be honest, Michael, this nonsense that you keep pushing on the Nazi regime and Hitler, most of it is Western propaganda. And America was far worse than that with its torture, its destruction.
I'm not saying that they didn't. Let me tell you, because I get a lot of criticism from a lot of people about talking about Hitler and the Nazis. Okay, I understand that a lot of what we've been told the Nazis did was made up. In fact, I got a story coming on up here about just how extensive that propaganda was leading into World War II and how much of it was fake. But when I'm using the popular image of Hitler and the Nazis, I'm basically playing to what still a large segment of the population, how they view them. And again, like I said, the art of being a rabble-rouser is knowing what the rabble is ready to listen to and what they're not ready to listen to. And we're still treading on very thin ground here if we try and challenge too many of the beliefs that people hang on to. We have to just chip away from the outside a little bit at the time. And we can't come in and say everything that you think you know is total crap, because you're not going to get a receptive audience with that approach. So we have to go a little bit at a time. Okay.
I agree, Michael, because I tend to come in like a bull at a china shop.
Yeah, I have noticed that a few times here. Anyway, listen, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over in the chat room, one of the people put out, there's always going to be war talk. War leaders want to motivate their troops forward. Admiral Halsey was famous for the statement, kill Japs, kill Japs, kill more Japs. And remember, during America's expansion into the West, the only good Indian's a dead Indian, and so forth and so on. People talk tough where they're in the middle of a war. Now, the real measure of General Mattis may be found in this article that came out of Business Insider, because apparently during the discussions where Trump was evaluating him for the secretary's position, apparently Mattis got Trump to rethink his position on torture. And the report we're getting from the New York Times was that Mattis told Trump he never found torture to be useful, and basically said, give me a pack of cigarettes and a couple of beers and I'll do better. So this is what this guy is thinking in private, not grandstanding in front of the troops or everything. And obviously, he on that issue, he's right. Torture never produces actionable intelligence. It produces politically expedient confessions. Okay, now moving on. Kellyanne Conway, who was unfortunately embarrassed by that ridiculous New York Times story that claimed that Donald Trump was not going to criminally investigate Hillary Clinton. And it caused a lot of confusion. It damaged Trump's image in his supporters' eyes, and maybe that's what it was designed to do. But on reading the actual transcript of the interview, he was asked point blank, are you taking the investigations off the table? Donald Trump said no. Now, during that interview, Trump also made a comment, it wasn't a high priority, which I agree with. There are more important things he's got to be dealing with right now. And he said, I'm not out for revenge, which doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to interfere with the wheels of justice to begin with. But as soon as the Times had that banner headline, everybody went off and talked to all of Trump's aides and assistants and staffers, including Kellyanne Conway, saying, Trump has just said he's not going to criminally investigate Hillary Clinton. What's your response to that? And Kellyanne Conway tried to basically explain and justify that decision, not knowing her boss had not really said that. This is why Trump really can't stand the media, the corporate media, and neither can I. Today, Kellyanne Conway is saying Hillary might not be off the hook for her classified emails because the Trump administration may look at that again. So they're basically sending out the signal saying that, yeah, that there's still an issue out there. All right, we're going to grab a phone call from Michael in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Like John from Barbados, I was listening to his comments. I'd like to add a couple of things to the kind of people that Trump is appointing. And I'm from California, and I know very well this guy, Treasury Secretary Minchum. The guy is, he ruined a few people here in California. He made some movies, but at the same time, he bought that failed bank, Indian One, in Pasadena.
Mm-hmm.
And, the guy is a shyster. He is not a decent guy. And it's clear that, to me, anybody that works at Goldman Sachs, it's like whatever's born out of a cat, it's mice. So I think that's a very bad appointment. The second guy is that guy that he nominated for the military. I think that guy is probably not even mentally stable.
Well, wait a minute. You're not actually listening to my broadcast, are you? Because we need to understand something. The vast majority of us are going on the public image of these people and what we've read about them in both the corporate and the independent media. We've never actually met them face to face, which is what Donald Trump is doing now to take the real measure of these individuals. And as I pointed out with this story that just came on out, General Mattis is talking Donald Trump out of torture. And obviously that is in stark contrast to what his public image is, or at least as it's being presented, certainly by Trump's critics and Hillary's supporters. So we need to go very, very carefully here. And again, when you look at an organization like Goldman Sachs, okay, the crooks are the ones up at the very top and the ones assisting them. Not everybody working at Goldman Sachs is a criminal. Okay, they're there for their...
This guy was a partner.
Okay, well, all right. You don't agree with the choice, but you know something. Donald Trump is going to do a lot of things that we don't agree with. He said a lot of things during the campaign I don't agree with. But again, I maintain that Donald Trump on his worst day is still going to be better for the country than Hillary Clinton on her best. And each of us, hang on. Each of us has a different view of what the perfect cabinet is going to be. And we're not going to agree on these things. There are still people out there pushing Romney for Secretary of State. I think it would be a disaster. I think Petraeus is more suitable among the people that Trump is talking to. And then we have all these other people calling on in saying that this or that person ought to be Secretary of State who's not even under consideration at this time. So, talking about the appointments, it strikes me, it's getting to be almost a waste of time until we see how Donald Trump manages those individuals, because their jobs are to carry out the policies Donald Trump is setting out. And if they go rogue on him, he's got the option to fire them, and I think we're going to leave it at that. Let's switch over to Dennis in Florida. Aloha, Dennis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I got this burning desire all week to call you about this. There's a media blackout on the Secretary of State nomination.
No, there isn't.
That has been missing is Pat Buchanan.
Well,
is a fellow who's got all the credentials. He's got the poise. He's got the statesmanship. He knows how to work with people. And I just cannot believe it. This whole thing with Romney, I believe, is being pushed because they're twisting his arm. That maybe if it goes to the vote in the House with this debacle going on over the electoral college, that he's trying to court them that the never Trump Republicans will vote in favor of Trump being president. Otherwise, they could upturn the whole election. I believe there's a lot of traitors sitting in there. What do you think?
Well, I don't know that they're necessarily traitors under the strict definition of treason, but everybody there is pushing for their own agenda, their own enrichment, their own glorification, their own empowerment. And again, I think Romney is being pushed by some of Donald Trump's financial backers because they see Romney as somehow being good for business. And like I said, I think the only reason Romney is looking at the Secretary of State position is the same reason that Hillary Clinton wanted it, as a springboard to another run for the presidency. But again, the word we're getting out of the Trump campaign is, yes, he had the dinner with Romney. He's gone through the motions, but he does seem to be settling on Petraeus. Now, as far as Pat Buchanan...
What do you think about Buchanan, Mike? What do you think about Buchanan?
To the best of my knowledge, he's not even under consideration right now.
I know. It's amazing because I think he's eminently qualified, you know? I mean, if you ever saw him on the McLaughlin Report every Sunday morning, he battled the neocons and the liberals on both sides. Mm-hmm. He's the only voice of reason that was ever on that show. They could check it out on YouTube, you know?
Okay, well, I'm sure a lot of us have people we wish were going to be Secretary of State. I'm still pushing for Tulsi Gabbard, but it's not going to happen. And, Donald Trump got elected president, and this is his call to make here, unfortunately, and you're not going to agree with it. Harry Truman used to say the Oval Office was actually the hottest kitchen in the world, because it doesn't matter what you do, there's going to be a whole bunch of people who do not like it. And I'm sure Trump is learning that wisdom right now. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to get on back to the news. In fact, we're going to go ahead and close the lines for a while here, because I have got a bunch of stuff I need to get through. Now then, Anthony Weiner, poor old Anthony, and no, I'm not really feeling sorry for him because everything that happened, he did it to himself. He's now been hit with a $65,000 fine for campaign finance violations, going back to his failed run for mayor of New York City in 2013. Apparently, he was breaking the rules back then. But then find me any major politician who hasn't broken the rules here and there. So let's talk about the corporate media and the war on the independent media, which, if you think about it in the wide view, this is a war on skepticism. This is the government and the corporate media making war on those who will not blindly believe what they are told to believe. In another context, we would see the heretics being burned at the stake in the town square for refusing to believe. Remember when they tortured Galileo because he thought maybe the Earth was orbiting around the sun? That kind of thing. That kind of a mindset here. The U.S. corporate media continues to claim that Moscow is responsible for Trump's election. That's one of the arguments they took into, I think it was the state of Wisconsin. And Wisconsin came on back and said their counting machines are not hooked to the internet. Russia couldn't hack in and change a single thing. And nobody's come up with any evidence at all. It is guilt by accusation. You know, it's possible. They could have done it. That's it. That's the entire case. Nobody has any proof whatsoever. The only evidence that's surfacing about election fraud is on Hillary's side, like that story we talked about in Nevada, where somebody decided to check out if these people who voted by mail actually lived at the addresses on the voter registrations. And they came back with over 90% of them didn't exist. Now, as we've mentioned before, Donald Trump is not in love with the corporate media. He doesn't feel he should be beholden to them. And keep that in mind. Whenever you see anything in the corporate media about Donald Trump, they are hostile to him. He made them look bad. He's embarrassed them. And he's basically said, I don't need you in the age of the Internet. And Donald Trump has been using Twitter to send out announcements from his transition office to the public, to the point where Twitter is now saying, well, we're gonna ban your Trump Twitter channel because what you're putting out there is hate speech. Donald Trump has now started his own YouTube channel to combat the propaganda coming out of the corporate media. Videos are already starting to go up there, daily updates. And it's worthwhile to go to his Twitter feed and his YouTube channel to find out what's really going on because of all the nonsense in the corporate media. I mean, the corporate media is a big part of this push to get Romney as Secretary of State. They're all hot and bothered to get Romney in there here. Now, over at Breitbart News, where they have been doing wonderful work at exposing a lot of the stuff that's going on, they're now under economic attack. They're being blocked by AdExchange. Kellogg's has pulled their ads. It's basically economic censorship. We're seeing this over on YouTube, where politically sensitive videos and channels, if they're not being outright deleted, they're being disqualified for monetization. Now, YouTube has never allowed me to have ads and monetize any of the videos that we have on YouTube, so this current campaign doesn't really affect me. But it's a way, it's a war of money. They want to bankrupt the independent media and drive us out of business, so you have no choice but to become dependent, once again, on the corporate media. Speaking of the corporate media, over at CNN, known as the Clinton News Network, there's an interesting video. It's on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And they're doing, it's a video that was being run not on the air, but preparation for their coverage of Trump's speech at the Carrier factory in Indianapolis. And you can hear a producer in the background say to the on-air talent, if I do this, he's landed. And then she says, if I do this, he's crashed, hopefully. And everybody cracks up. They all think it's all funny as heck. Oh, yes, please let Donald Trump's plane crash. I think they need a visit from the Secret Service. All right, let's get into the war zones now. Emphasis on the plural. Things are going on over there. They're not getting a lot of coverage here. One of the things that's happened is following Donald Trump's election, the Syrian forces have been escalating their operations because they understand after January 20th, the supply of weapons, ammunition, chemicals to the terrorists is going to stop. And so they're just ramping this up as fast as they can. And they're making great gains in Aleppo. Now, Erdogan may have backed off his talk about removing the tyrant from Damascus, but the Turkish Foreign Minister, Mevlut Cavusoglu, didn't get the memo. He's on a visit to Beirut and was making a speech, and he comes on out and says, Assad cannot remain in power. So the war hawks are still out there, still trying to cause as much trouble as they can. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry has observed that the United Nations has stopped delivering humanitarian aid to Aleppo. And one of the problems may be that for some reason, somehow, the U.S.-backed terrorists always know where the aid is going to be delivered, and they'll just take it for themselves. Very, very little has actually been getting to the people of Aleppo, according to some of the people who are now finally able to get on out and talk to the media. Now, Sergei Lavrov is wondering why, with the Costello Road into Aleppo now back under Syrian government control, why the UN isn't sending humanitarian aid in through that way. Now, there's another video we put up. Unfortunately, it's not in English. But basically, the Syrian forces cleared out a headquarters of the Turkmen fighters, and they found the chemical precursors for chemical weapons stockpiled there. Got the Merck label on them and everything. That's who was using the chemical weapons, not Bashar al-Assad. Now, up in Ukraine, their forces are shelling Donetsk People Republic village using Grad multiple missile launcher systems. This is real heavy munitions causing a huge amount of damage. Apparently about 40 shells were fired in all, and they're still trying to figure out how many people have been killed. They know that at least 2 civilians and 1 DPR serviceman were wounded. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Getting on back to the news. North Korea has conducted a massive artillery training near Wonsan. Apparently, something like 90 howitzers, equivalent to 7 or 8 battalions. Boy, that must have been a lot of noise. Now, let's talk about weapons. I have been making it an issue that America's military-industrial complex is absorbing huge amounts of the nation's wealth and producing junk. F-22 asphyxiating its pilots, the Independence-class littoral combat ships with corrosion, Freedom-class drivetrain problems. They're already saying that Gerald R. Ford may never actually really be suitable for combat because of all the problems with its new whiz-bang technology, and they're acknowledging they shouldn't have tried so many new things all at the same time. We've been talking about the Zumwalt, the new stealth destroyer, the one with the very interesting inverted bow that makes it unstable. It broke down. Apparently water leaked in through the shaft seals, got into the electric motors, and basically disabled it, and they towed it to a port in Panama. It is now underway, heading for its home port in San Diego. They had to cannibalize parts from one of the sister ships still under construction in order to get it running. Now, if you know anything about real war, you go through spare parts very, very fast. And when you build very expensive warships and airplanes and so forth, the spare parts are equally expensive as well. Now, as I mentioned before, the Independence-class littoral combat ships, corrosion problems. They had to take the lead ship out of the water and dry dock it, replace whole sections of the hull. The Freedom-class littoral combat ships, drivetrain problems. And according to the Pentagon's top testing agency, these 2 new classes of littoral combat ships have, quote, a near zero chance of completing a 30-day mission. Now, this program is behind schedule. It's hundreds of millions over budget. And the Pentagon's top tester is saying they are incapable of conducting most of the basic missions they're intended to carry out. This is triggering a Senate investigation into just what the heck is going on. Now, yesterday we mentioned how the draft defense bill for next year removed the suggestion or removed the program that would have required young women to register for a military draft. And today, expressing his ire, Obama is out there saying he fully supports drafting young women into the military for combat roles. I wonder if that includes his own kids when they come of age. But obviously, I disagree with that policy, and I've already explained why that would be the case. All right, now, when I was talking to a previous caller, oh, here's the music. We're going to take a break. Station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and the phone lines are closed. We're going to get some news done and out of the way here. And as I mentioned to an earlier caller, there's a lot of propaganda that goes out regarding war. And we did a little article, Fake News and War Party Lies, actually by Pat Buchanan. And we linked to it. And he's got all these quotes by Franklin Roosevelt. And back in 1941, Franklin Roosevelt, during his Navy Day radio address, told the nation, quote, "I have in my possession a secret map made in Germany by Hitler's government, by the planners of the New World Order. It's a map of South America as Hitler proposes to reorganize it. The geographical experts of Berlin, however, have ruthlessly obliterated all the existing boundary lines, bringing the whole continent under their domination. This map makes clear the Nazi design not only against South America, but against the United States as well. It is a plan to abolish all existing religions, Protestant, Catholic, Mohammedan, Hindu, Buddhist, and Jewish alike. In the place of the churches of our civilization, there's going to be set up an international Nazi church. In the place of the Bible, the words of Mein Kampf will be imposed and enforced as Holy Writ, and in place of the cross of Christ will be 2 symbols, the swastika and the naked sword. A God of blood and iron will take the place of the God of love and mercy." Where did Roosevelt get these secret Nazi plans? They were forgeries by British agents in New York, operating under a gentleman named William Stevenson, Winston Churchill's man called Intrepid. So the reality is, governments have been lying to the people all along to get us into wars, to get us to do as we're told, to get us to pay taxes, to get us to breed more workers and soldiers for them. Prudence demands that we re-examine everything we have ever been told by the state-controlled schools, by the corporate media, by the government itself. It may be that there's actually very little truth in any of it. Now, we're coming up on the Pearl Harbor commemoration, 75th anniversary, and I'm in kind of an interesting position because I can look out that window down on the remains of the Arizona, and I've been able to actually travel around this island and verify some of the things that we've dug up about how Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. And we're going to be talking about this more next Monday, Tuesday, as we get into the 7th commemoration. But that, too, was a hoax. Just like when they claimed the Lusitania wasn't carrying any weapons, it was an innocent passenger ship ruthlessly killed by the Germans. And it wasn't. It was smuggling weapons to Great Britain, which made it a legitimate target of war. And the German government actually ran ads in the New York newspapers warning people not to take passage on that ship because it was going to be targeted. How many more times do you have to be lied to until you finally accept and understand you are ruled by lies, fraud, and deception? In a government that lies, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. That's why they're at war with the independent media. And as I said before in the show, it's not really a war on the independent media. It's a war on skepticism. It's a war on those who refuse to believe as they're told to believe. Bring back the Inquisition. We'll deal with those non-believers here. All right, let's look at the economy because a lot of stuff is going on. As you know, this weekend there is a very important referendum taking place in Italy, and its failure to pass could bring down some of Italy's top banks. And right now, as of the last time, it was trailing 11 points in the polls. Now, maybe they've loaded up Italy with a bunch of Diebold machines or something, but that's where we are. Right now, the Italian bank shares today took a dive, contaminating the whole euro market ahead of this referendum. Everybody's heading for cover right now, heading for safe spaces. Play with their Play-Doh here. Italy's Sunday vote set to trigger the most violent economic shock in history. Apparently, the polls have narrowed. It's now 54% support for no. If no does win, it could be the end of the European Union. Now, here in the United States of America, we're hearing all this ludicrous thing about how, oh, look at all these jobs we've created this last month here. U.S. employers added 178,000 jobs, and unemployment sinks to 4.6%. Well, a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, those 178,000 jobs are Christmas seasonal hires. Those jobs will disappear come January. Okay? Second, there are 95.1 million legal American citizens willing and able to find work who have not been able to find jobs for months, and they're simply not counted in order to come up with this ludicrous 4.6% number. So why are they talking about that? Well, what's going on here is the corporate media is already out there trying to sell the idea that Donald Trump is going to be inheriting a country with a wonderful, strong economy. And we're getting this from Politico, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Yahoo, saying Donald Trump, the economy is going to be in great shape when Donald Trump takes over. So when it implodes, guess who they're going to blame? Just like Herbert Hoover all over again. Actually, Donald Trump is inheriting an absolute disaster of an economy. It's on the verge of a lockup. But you know politicians, they never accept responsibility for their mistakes. They're going to find somebody else to scapegoat for it. Unfortunately, Donald Trump fits the bill there. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about the economic news. Our phone lines are closed right now because I got a lot of stuff to get through before the lovely Lady Claire joins us in an hour. Now, down in Venezuela, which has been targeted by the United States, going all the way back to Hugo Chavez, they're in a stage of complete hyperinflation. They're weighing the money rather than counting it. Zimbabwe, which became famous for their $100 trillion paper notes, abandoned that monetary system, started a new one. That one didn't work. They've just introduced a brand new currency that's already losing value. Why is this going on? Because of private central banking, which by design creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, to hold nations and people slaves to that debt. That's what's going on here. And it's a giant pyramid scheme. Sooner or later, any country enslaved to a privately owned central bank that issues all the public currency as a loan and interest will lock up and collapse. Now, in the past, it was basically isolated. It would happen to this nation, and then all the other nations would leap in, refund it, restart the scam all over again. But today, because of globalism, the entire system is hanging by a thread. We'll use the European Union as an example. In the European Union, some of those member states are in a lot more trouble than others. And what Brussels has been doing is siphoning off wealth from economies that are doing well, like Germany and Great Britain, and using it to prop up the EU member states whose economies aren't doing very well at all. And what they're really doing, if you can imagine a boat sitting on a lake, and there are 18 holes in the bottom of the boat, but only 17 corks. And all Brussels can do is yank a cork out of one hole and shove it into another in full view of the press and scream, "We're working on the problem." But the water is still coming in. The total aggregate debt continues to grow. And unless you can control all the water coming on in, all the debt, write it off, do something, it's inevitable the EU is going to sink. And the same thing applies to the entire world. because all but just, I think, 3 countries are now enslaved by these private central bank scammers. They've been doing this for 300 years. And when it comes down, it will be global. And there will be a tremendous amount of hardship. But it will also open up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the people of planet Earth to stand up and say, no more private central banks. The public currency of a nation must be managed as a public utility for the benefit of the nation, its people, and its commerce, and not as a privatized for-profit operation that benefits the bankers and corrupt politicians only. Speaking of corrupt politicians, apparently there is pressure to extend the anti-Russian sanctions by another 6 months. Now, these sanctions have actually caused a lot more damage to Europe and the West than to Russia. But by golly, we're going to keep on making the same mistake and hope things will be a little bit different. It's all about image. We're taking a harsh stance against Russian aggression. It's all posturing, chest-thumping here. The U.S. Senate just passed a bill to extend the sanctions on Iran. The vote was 99-0. They had 1 abstention. And what this is doing is sending a message to the world that the U.S. doesn't keep its treaty commitments because Iran has done everything they promised to do under the P5+1 deal. The U.S., which promised to end the sanctions, just extended them again. Governments around the world are now realizing that any treaties signed by the United States aren't worth the parchment they're on. Any promises made by the U.S. are worthless. The U.S. continues to punish Iran, not because Iran has done anything, but because their masters in Tel Aviv still want Iran broken up into little tiny pieces, easy to bully, easy to push around, like they're trying to do in Iraq, Turkey, Syria, all those places. Let's talk about immigration here. It looks like Obama is going to try and flood as many refugees and illegals into the country as he possibly can before Donald Trump can build a wall or put crocodiles in the Rio Grande or whatever he's going to do to solve this. Fastest way to solve it is simply say, non-citizens do not get social benefits. Now, there's a story coming out of Zero Hedge. And basically, 2 years ago, the Clinton administration declared a crisis of underage illegals coming in across our border. Oh, these minors, we have to let them in. And so Obama signed an executive order allowing minors of certain Central American countries to flee to the U.S. under the refugee program. The only problem is 70% of the people who came in under that minor refugee program are actually over the age of 18 and legally adults. If they're over 18, they can vote. They can vote for Hillary Clinton. Now, according to Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley, the Obama administration is getting ready to unilaterally admit thousands of refugees from known terror hotspots that were denied entry by Australia authorities. The refugees are from Iran, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and Sudan. These are people who were deemed too dangerous for a nation founded by prison convicts. And Obama's going to let them all in here, despite what happened at Ohio State University. Now, the Department of Homeland Security, despite all kinds of scandals involving misappropriated funds and kickbacks and so forth, DHS is going to continue using private detention facilities to house asylum seekers. They're running out of places to put them. May have to actually open up those FEMA camps. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has unsheathed his weapon to deal with all of these cities and even states that are saying they're going to maintain their sanctuary status, that they're not going to enforce immigration law in their jurisdictions. To heck with you, Donald Trump. We love our illegal immigrant voters, or words to that effect. And Trump has simply come on back and said, okay, well, I can cancel the funding, the federal funding that you're getting. And according to Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, the loss of those funds would drive the city right into bankruptcy, drive the whole state of California into bankruptcy. So, anyway, over in the European Union, there is now a plan in Brussels to declare protests against Brussels a crime. They want to criminalize political dissent against the European Union project. In other words, censorship, loss of freedom of speech. Remember just a few days ago, Juncker was out there saying, no more of these pesky independence referendums. We know they want to leave us. We don't want them to leave. We want their money, their obedience. Now, Norbert Hofer, the far-right-wing politician who's running for president in Austria, saying that if he wins the presidency this Sunday, election's happening, he will allow an EU referendum. I'm not even sure how we would pronounce that. An exit? We'll come up with a word for it. But we're hearing this all across the EU. Marine Le Pen is talking about a Frexit. Denmark is talking about leaving. Now Austria. The European Union was a raw deal for the Europeans. Any empire is a raw deal for the people who have to live in it. You go to the history books and they talk about Alexander the Great. What an amazing person. He conquered the known world. And you do a little more digging, and you realize what life was like for those people in the lands that he conquered. It wasn't very good. Now, up at the Dakota Access Pipeline, the Morton County Sheriff's Department has gone to Ace Hardware stores and asked them to stop selling heating supplies to the water protesters. It's very cold up there, and it's about to get a lot colder. Ace Hardware said, okay, we will not sell any of these protesters anything to keep them warm in the coming cold. And that is really a shame because I like shopping at Ace, but I guess it's Home Depot from now on. By the way, looking back at Black Friday and what was selling and what was not, boy, were the guns selling off the racks. The numbers are now in. Enough guns were sold on Black Friday a week ago to outfit the entire U.S. Marine Corps and then some. Everybody is arming up in the face of a government that has clearly gone rogue and refuses to accept the will of the people in this last election. Now, a year ago, we had that false flag out in San Bernardino where witnesses claimed that 3 men dressed in military gear carried out the shooting, and then all of a sudden, magically, it mutated into these 2 Muslims, a husband and a wife. And the wife was so diminutive, couldn't possibly have carried all the gear the witnesses said they were carrying. And they're doing the look back, oh, the horrible, they're recycling the terror attacks to keep you scared. And Corbin News, apparently by accident, has played the footage of the original police dispatchers as they're talking about how 3 suspects have fled. Not 2, 3. They can't even keep their stories correct any longer. Now, getting into the world of computers. Actually, we're coming up here on a commercial break, so I'm going to not even tease this story. But it is rather alarming, I think would be a good word. You need to go back and look at how many times you've been lied to. Not just the lies you've been told this year. Your entire life has been a lie and an illusion. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to step back here to where that caller called on in and said, General Matisse, was quoted as saying, it's fun to shoot people, which does sound really, really, really bad. What's important is the context. And here's where we see how the corporate media is selectively quoting somebody to make them look like one thing when they're something else. An alert listener just sent me in the complete quote. And it goes like this, quote, you go into Afghanistan, you've got guys who slap women around for 5 years because they didn't wear a veil. You know, guys like that ain't got no manhood left anyway, so it's a heck of a lot of fun to shoot them, end quote. Now, that's a very different situation than simply implying that he just likes to shoot people at random. I don't have any sympathy for guys who beat up on their wives. I have no sympathy for anybody who abuses a child. But that's a heck of a long way away from just saying that Matisse just likes to shoot people just to shoot people. And you've got to be very, very careful when all of this stuff is being put on out to demonize Donald Trump's cabinet picks, because they're trying to discredit and demonize him ahead of Hillary's still going to try and steal the White House at the Electoral College. And the entire corporate media is just ganged up on Donald Trump. And they're going to do dirty tricks like that. Like the New York Times, they misquoted him. They ignored where he said that investigations of Hillary are not being taken off the table, and they took a quote about him not wanting revenge and it not being a priority to investigator, and created the headline, Donald Trump will not criminally investigate Hillary Clinton. The so-called real media has put their lie machine into full spin cycle. Rock and roll, afterburner, overdrive. And you need to keep that in mind in all the reporting about what Donald Trump is doing and what his potential cabinet picks, administration picks are going to be. Because corporate media is still trying to filter. They're still in attack mode on him. They're not going to report anything fairly about him, and you need to keep that in mind. Now, let's get back to the world computers we were going to mention here. The FSB is now out there warning Russian banks, Russian corporations, that to expect massive cyber attacks from, quote, foreign special services, end quote. Gee, I wonder who they might be worried about. I don't know, it might be the same people who keep hacking my server. Over at Microsoft, Windows 10 is not doing very good, especially since they started charging for it. It's not moving forward. It's only got 23% of the entire computer market, with the entire computer market basically dominated by Windows machines and Macintosh, Apple machines. And the Windows people are hanging on to their Windows 7. Some are still working with XP. They don't want Windows 10. And let's be very honest here. I did give it a fair try. We had a laptop that supports Claire's Choir at the church. It was running Windows 7. And I allowed it to upgrade to Windows 10 so I could see what all the brouhaha was about. And when it came on up from the upgrade, it had erased all of the music software and music. Not moved to the delete bin, literally erased it. And it forced me to change my login credentials to match my Microsoft account, which means potential hackers already have half the information needed to try and brute force their way into the machine. And it was bloated, difficult to use, and we all can assume it's got the latest and greatest in government spyware on it. There was supposed to be a button that allows you to revert back to your original operating system. It turned out that did not work perfectly. It went back to being or thinking it was a Windows 7 machine, but there were all kinds of problems. I ultimately wound up literally throwing that machine in the trash. It was that hopeless. But we live in a nation where government and corporations decide for you what products you will buy and use. You're not allowed that freedom any longer. You will buy Windows 10, and you will like it, you Schweinhund. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're just now getting an emergency alert here, flash flood warning. We got some major storms coming on, including thunderstorms later on today here. What's really making me nervous is for the last couple of months, my neighbor's been building this big wooden boat, and he's got all these zoo animals wandering around, which they're leaving messes in my hedges. Anyway, getting on back to the computer stuff. Hackers have devised a little USB, they call it a zapper. And I guess it looks just like any kind of a USB memory stick, but it will permanently destroy any device it's plugged into. It literally has a way of frying the circuits. And apparently it's actually called USB Kill. And it's available, I guess, on the dark web. You can actually buy one of these things. And you can plug it in and disable a car with a computer system, the screen display, GPS mapping. I mean, USB ports are everywhere, in cars, charging stations, power sockets, airplanes. What kind of a mindset creates things like this? When did being destructive have a higher social standing than being creative? Now then, there is a new startup company, comma.ai, and they're developing software for self-driving cars. And they're developing software for cars that weren't designed to be self-driving. And basically, they're helping developers learn how to build a device that can turn their car into an autonomous vehicle. And apparently the strategy is they're giving this thing away for free to get around all the regulations about self-driving cars coming out of Washington, D.C., which seem more designed about protecting the companies that are already into this field rather than coming up with a safe product. So not all hackers are bad. I think this is a good example of somebody trying to devise something more interesting. I would really like to see an open source replacement for the software in all of these cars' computers. Under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, you're not allowed to look at the software in the car that you own. Not allowed to see if it's reporting your driving patterns to your insurance company, or how often it's telling the police where you are. I think there actually have been efforts to produce user installable open source replacements for the computer software on the car. I'm very uncomfortable about how much of our property is still hidden from us, especially in the realm of computers. And maybe I was spoiled because I started with computers back when everything in them was wide open. You could go in, play with the machine language, you could dump out the operating system and look at it. You knew what was in there. You knew what it was doing. You could get in there and fix the problems that came from the software companies if you wanted to. Now, getting on back to the idea of malicious people, this is kind of an ugly story. A woman in Southern California created a fake Facebook profile in the name of her ex-boyfriend, and then used that fake Facebook profile to send herself threatening messages. And the ex-boyfriend was arrested 4 times before investigators figured out what was going on. And she was out there with these fake messages, stalking, kidnapping, beating her. Heck hath no fury like a woman scorned, I guess. And that's something that's kind of worth keeping in mind, how easy it is to fake an identity online. In the first hour, we were talking about how somebody set up a website that has, an online poll. 4.2 million people have signed demanding the Electoral College put Clinton in the White House. We have no way of knowing if those signatures represent real people or not. We know the U.S. government has actually bought software that allows a single propagandist to assume hundreds of fake identities in social media. Lying to the American people is big business. In our struggling economy, it's probably the only growth industry we still have. So, since we're talking about the weather, which is coming on in here, we're actually here in Hawaii under a winter storm warning for the tops of the volcanoes. And they're expecting as much as 30 inches of snow on Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa coming in with this storm. And I'm sure Al Gore is out there somewhere saying, it's not snow, it's white lumpy rain. It's your imagination. The world is warming. The world is warming. Snowfalls are a thing of the past. It's got to be a cool time for people on holiday. Down there on the Big Island, they can go snow skiing in the morning, go surfing in the Pacific in the afternoon. That's kind of an interesting thing. Ought to make up a fake poster. Ski Haleakala. Have a guy on skis right at the edge of that gigantic crater. Now, out in California, Governor Jerry Brown has just signed a law to require dairy farmers to reduce bovine methane emissions. I guess they're going to call this program Obamacork. And there really isn't a way to reduce a cow's production of methane. It is a byproduct of their digestive process and how they make milk and grow into being burgers. Now, maybe Brown has an idea that barns are now going to be turned into controlled environments where the methane is scrubbed out of the air. But you need to remember, methane naturally decomposes in the presence of oxygen into carbon dioxide and water vapor. It doesn't build up. Now, what's really going to happen, and it's already started happening, under this huge burden of gratuitous regulations in service to the liberals' utopian idea of we can control the sun and the moon and the stars and the climate and all the rest of it, the dairies are going to close down. They're going to move someplace else with a little more common sense. That's what's going to happen. And there are a lot of companies that have already closed business in California and left for other states because there's so many regulations now to serve these wacko political ideologies to make people do things and pay money that actually has no real benefit at all. Europe was caught up in that whole carbon trading thing. No detectable result whatsoever except that the carbon traders got rich. That was the only detectable result. Now, looking across the news reports coming out of Alaska and the northern part of the United States, it is looking more and more like the old Farmer's Almanac was absolutely correct. Winter is arriving late, but it's going to be a heavy and hard one. And remember, back in March 20th, 2000, the UK Independent banner headline, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And we have all these reports coming on now that this is going to be the coldest winter in the last 5 years. They're predicting new cold records are going to be set this winter. We're heading into a new little ice age, is the reality. And solar observatories are confirming solar activity is at a low. The sun has virtually no sunspots. It looks like a cue ball from a billiard table. There's nothing going on it right now. New Maunder minimum, new little ice age. And the carbon Nazis are still out there saying, well, we're not going to call it global warming anymore because the world isn't warming, but we'll call it climate change and we're still going to argue for a carbon tax. What sense does that make? The whole idea behind a carbon tax was that carbon dioxide is warming the world. If we're going into a new little ice age, carbon dioxide, and for that matter methane, are good things to have in the atmosphere, aren't they? The global warming movement was never about the environment or global warming. It was about finding another excuse to take money away from you and make you think it's a good idea. And I am very, very glad that Donald Trump thinks this is a load of nonsense, and he's absolutely right. It is a load of nonsense. Anybody who understands science at all and scientific method knew from the start that all of these institutions and agencies that were putting out these proclamations about high temperatures and then not able to back it up with the raw data, that something had gone horribly wrong with the process. Maybe time to put up my ClimateGate article again here. Now, you remember Planned Parenthood? Big stink when it came on out that Planned Parenthood was harvesting fetal parts for sale from the women who were seeking abortions at Planned Parenthood. Basically, Planned Parenthood was treating unborn babies the way your local supermarket treats a chicken. Cut it up, wrap it in plastic, sell it. And today, the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Select Investigative Panel have referred Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast for criminal prosecution to the Texas Attorney General on account of the illegal sale of baby body parts. And this is another area where you start to wonder what's going on with that whole liberal mindset. Remember when Hillary Clinton was out there saying that a fetus is just a blob of protoplasm and you can kill it right up to the moment it's about to be born? Because it's not really a person until it's born. And yet in this country, if you damage an eagle's egg, you can go to prison for years. Now, don't get me wrong. I like eagles. I like nature. I like animals. But when did an unborn eagle acquire rights to survival and protection that unborn human beings do not? You can see how absurd this is getting. I think in a lot of ways the liberal establishment has lost touch with reality. They're almost becoming their own cult. Certainly Hillary Clinton's campaign ran as a cult, where they're caught up in these articles of belief that aren't really connected with the real world. Human-caused global warming being a good example of that. They're not interested in the science. They want to believe. They want to act on that belief. They want to feel superior. I was watching that show that Lee Remini is doing on Scientology, and she made a very interesting observation. And she said one of the reasons why being a Scientologist did help your career is that you would walk into an office full of producers and casting directors just knowing you were superior to them because you were a Scientologist. You weren't timid. You weren't afraid. You felt like you were the best person in the room, and you could just take control, and they'd respond to that. Well, that's what being a religious fanatic does. You believe you're the best person in that room, and you act like it, no matter how ridiculous what it is you're believing in happens to be. Xenu, global warming. It's okay to kill a fetus just before it's born, but don't you touch those eagle eggs. Now, Maryland is about to become the first state in the United States to ban all pesticides harmful to honeybees. And they're basically going to eliminate all of these pesticides in order to protect the remaining bee culture. And this really is very important, because those bees are an essential component of the production of natural food, because they do the work of pollinating the plants, which allows them to reproduce. Now, we've been hearing about all these horrific studies of colony collapse disorder, whether it was caused by GMO pollen. That was one study. They tried to blame it on cell phone towers, except that cell phone towers have been around for decades, and colony collapse disorder didn't start appearing until GMO crops started gathering a huge market share across America. There's another phenomenon out there, an article that came out of Rumor Mill News. Apparently, and this is not being reported by the corporate media, there have been dozens, hundreds of these acts of vandalism against beehives. People literally going in to an apiary and burning the hives, killing off the bees. Why? Were you stung as a child or something? Did you miss a pill on your psychiatric medication? Well, just stop and think. Who benefits? Who benefits if the natural pollinators, the honeybees, go away? Because if there are no bees to pollinate the natural seeds, if the bees die off or are killed, farmers will be forced to buy pre-pollinated GMO seeds. So you can see where somebody benefits from the bees being killed off, especially if that guilty party is unable to sell their product to people because of concerns over its safety. But this, and when I was a farm kid in New Hampshire, I had beehives. I had them up until the doctor tested my younger brother and found out he was hideously allergic to bee stings and could die. Then I had to smoke the hives and everything. But I know what it's like to keep bees. I can't imagine why anybody would just walk onto somebody else's property and set fire to a hive without a real good profit motive behind it. Now, Germany has decided to exercise the European Union opt-out law. They are now banning all cultivation of GM crops within their borders. Not going to be allowed. More and more people are beginning to realize that GMO crops are, it's not just unhealthy, it's an attempt to monopolize world food production. The same way the Federal Reserve wants everybody in the world to go through the Federal Reserve note to conduct commerce, Monsanto wants every farmer on earth to buy their seeds in order to grow food in their own country. That is the ultimate agenda, and that also requires the destruction of the honeybees. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. Meanwhile, somebody just sent me a photo from the Big Island. One of our listeners on the Big Island just sent me a photo of the top of Mauna Kea. There's a lot of snow up there. There's a lot of snow up there. Time for a snowball fight. We need to make a Hawaiian snowman. Ship it to my family. Might not arrive in the same condition back there on the mainland. All right, we're going to take one phone call here before the top of the hour. Jeff in St. Paul, Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, the story about in the old days, the Indians would individually take the bag of precious seeds of the different corn lines and go far away from the encampment, find fresh ground where they would plant those corn and keep the genes all isolated in and amongst themselves, and then, be able to keep the thing going. And then, of course, you know the story about how, like, hybrid corn works, how they self-corn? In other words, the corn, they take the pollen from the top and put it down to the bottom so it grows, and they get the actual lineage seeds, the pure lines, and then they cross those to make hybrids.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Of course, the Indians didn't understand what genes and DNA were. They simply observed when they did certain things certain ways, certain results would happen, and they would do that. But the issue here, however, is for the volume of food that needs to be produced to feed our current population, any kind of hand pollinization represents a huge cost in labor. When you have 5 million honeybees out there doing it, that's one thing. Trying to find enough agricultural workers to go on out there and do the pollinization, whether it's cross-pollinization or self-pollinization, that would drive the cost of the food right through the ceiling, and there's no reason for that to happen other than it's an artifact or an after effect of one corporation's uncontrolled greed.
Yeah, it's the big business takeover, but, in the old days, everybody saved their best seeds and kept it and traded it and
absolutely. But, Monsanto wants to end heritage seeds. Their contract with anybody who's been dumb enough to plant their GMO products are that you buy new seeds every single year. You don't save your seeds and replant them. That's a violation of the contract, and they can come in and take your farm. And
maybe Trump will grow some corn at the White House.
Well, and the White House has seen a lot of interesting things grown on it. The portico on the White House during one presidency actually had hen houses, so they could have fresh eggs there.
Yeah, they have people have hens in Minneapolis now in the neighborhoods, and you can go and get eggs from your neighbors sometimes.
Okay, well, we're going to let you go because we're almost at the top of the hour here. We're going to close the phone lines here. Thanks a lot. We're going to close the phone lines again. New gas leak just erupted in Franklinville, New York. The gas pipeline leak underwater, just the water's frothing up. These pipes are not safe and durable because they're cheap. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, looking even more lovely than usual.
Thank you.
And what is your first story today?
Well, it's some troubling news on the economic front. Apparently, according to the number, multiple job holders hit new all-time high. And this is really troubling. And the number of multiple job holders, or people who are forced to hold more than one job due to insufficient wages or for other reasons. And it's here that the red light flashing came on, because while on a seasonally adjusted basis, the series rose once again by 61,000 to 7.8 million people. When looked on in an actual unadjusted basis, the number of multiple job holders increased again, rising by 57 and hitting 8.107 million, the highest number this century.
And the problem is, when the government is calculating jobs, if you have one person working 3 jobs, they count it as 3 jobs.
Yeah.
I remember that back when George W. Bush was president, and they were talking about the economic problems back then, and he was talking to this woman who was saying that she had to work 3 jobs, and all Bush could say, well, isn't that wonderful? What a land of opportunity that you could find 3 jobs.
Please. And that number, coupled with the reality that 95 million American workers, Mike, are no longer participating in the labor market, it just doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't look good at all. And as I was mentioning earlier in the show, the corporate media is trying to create this idea that Donald Trump is inheriting an economy that's in wonderful shape. The stock market's been soaring. Unemployment is down to 4.7%. And that's because everybody knows it's going to crash at some point.
Yep.
And they're going to dump the blame for it on Donald Trump, the way the Depression of the 1930s was blamed on Herbert Hoover, even though the Depression, what led to the Depression, happened long before he was able to take office.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'd like to bop over to Turkey. And apparently Erdogan has demanded that his Turkish citizens exchange their dollar to gold and Turkish lira. And early this morning, in yet another session of panicked selling, the Turkish lira crashed to a new low of just shy of U.S. Department of Treasury 3.60, and for a second or so went bidless as the currency plunged nearly 400 pips in seconds, after Turkish President Recep Erdogan said the path for investors will be opened with lower interest rates, and urged the central bank to imitate Japan and the U.S., where rates are low, and made the observation, why should we go around 14-15%? Well, unfortunately for Erdogan, the answer is simple. The currency tends to drop when an economy is seen as weak, the political regime unstable, and, yes, a central bank cuts rates, which Turkey, as shown in the chart, it's in the article, cannot afford if it hopes to maintain a stable economy, with the lira already at all-time lows. Now, Mike, my question on this, how can Erdogan actually force the Turkish people to do this except for some dubious executive decree under the still existing emergency powers he possesses? And if he does that, how is he going to get the Turkish people to comply? House-to-house raids by the Turkish military?
Well, that's where the whole thing falls apart, is enforcing compliance. And you need to remember that when Franklin Roosevelt outlawed private gold ownership, they didn't enforce it. A lot of people held on to their gold illegally, but enough people voluntarily turned it in to meet the needs to get the banks saved and everything. And this may be the case in Turkey, where they're just expecting 60 to 70% of the people will go along with this, and that's enough for our purposes.
I don't know if I'd bet on that level of compliance, considering how ticked off the Turkish people are with their government right now. And a couple more articles about the economy, this time going into Europe and that repercussion. Apparently, the Deutsche Bank stock slides after cutting off 3,400 non-strategic trading clients. This is not good. In September, headlines of Deutsche Bank trading clients pulling collateral sparked grave concern over the world's most systemically dangerous bank. Today, the stock is sliding once again, and as Wall Street Journal reports, the bank said it would cease providing some coverage for about 3,400 actively trading clients in its global markets divisions, according to a memo sent to equity staffs. And Mike, to me, this looks double plus and good for the Deutsche Bank. And
it does. We're going to start seeing a lot of mid-level executives accidentally walk off parking structures again.
And added to the reality that Italy's banks are in serious trouble and the European economy may be on its way to a terrible spin-out, it could possibly take the U.S. economy with it. And apparently, this referendum on Sunday, if it fails, up to 8 Italian banks may fail.
Well, the poll numbers are narrowing, and again, election fraud is hardly something that is unique to the United States of America.
Oh, no.
But at this point, it's a waiting game. We're seeing Brussels is totally defensive. They're fending off countries trying to leave. They're trying to plug the economic holes. But sooner or later, there's going to be something that happens they're simply not going to be able to deal with. Yeah. It's an inevitability at this point. Could happen on Sunday. Yeah. They might steal the election for Renzi. But there'll be something else down the road where they're simply going to run out of options.
Right, right.
We're going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. The lovely Lady Claire is with us for our third and final hour this Kaahumanu Friday. And what is your next story, my lady love?
Well, this isn't looking good. Apparently, Iran is threatening to walk away from the P5+1 nuclear deal in retaliation for new sanctions. And they're threatening to walk and pursue forms of retaliation, including a national boycott of American goods, as a result of Congress's overwhelming vote yesterday to level new sanctions against Iran for another 10 years.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah. Iran complied with all of the requirements of the P5+1 deal. They kept their word. And the United States has not kept their side of the bargain. And the displayed attitude coming out of Washington, D.C. and Israel and the Congress is, well, yes, they're doing what we want, but they're not doing it fast enough. You know, they got a bad attitude. We still don't trust them, and therefore we don't have to keep our side of the bargain. The damage from this is way beyond Iran. The damage from this is every other country on earth now understands that if you sign a treaty with the United States of America, it isn't worth the ink that was in the pen that signed it. Yep. The U.S. government goes back on their promises. And that's going to make whoever does wind up being Trump's Secretary of State, it's going to make their job a lot more difficult. Yeah. How do we go back on out and reestablish that you can do business with the U.S. government, that they can be trusted to keep their commitments to you? That's going to be really, really difficult to do.
Well, it looks to me, from my perspective, that this approval of these sanctions was a carefully crafted tactic by the U.S. Senate to anger the Iranian leadership to the point where they're going to walk away, restart their nuclear weapons programs as the justification for the U.S. ultimately declaring war against Iran, which will almost certainly, Mike, mean war with Russia.
Remember back in 2005 when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this, on this U.S. plan to take control of all the resource-rich areas of the world, to shackle them to the U.S. dollar, and the last one on the list was Iran. Yep. The U.S. government has wanted a war on Iran going back at least to 2005 and probably before that as well. And, of course, Israel has always wanted the U.S. to go in and destroy Iran for them.
And if I could ever craft an amendment to the Constitution, it would be this. when all congressional candidates declare their candidacy, that is the moment when one of their kids must enlist in the armed forces in units most likely to see frontline action. I'm almost willing to bet that this would dampen congressional ardor and lust for war, because this time with their kids tasked to participate in combat, it's personal. It's not just other people's kids getting killed and maimed for life, acceptable collateral damage, ultimately for corporate profit, but potentially will be their own. I think that would perhaps change the way in which the United States attempts to resolve its geopolitical differences.
You know, I miss the good old days when national leaders would lead their own armies into battle, whether it was Alexander the Great or Napoleon, and I think we ought to go back to that system. If there's going to be a war, the President of the United States, who is the Commander-in-Chief, should be out there commanding from the front.
I would agree, absolutely. And speaking of war, this is a very interesting and ironic development to me. Apparently, Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski are going to be honored by the Nobel Institute and Oslo universities. These two guys have been behind, immense wars: Iran, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and regime change against Allende in Chile. And they will be speaking at the first of a new event, the Nobel Peace Prize Forum in Oslo, created by the Nobel Institute.
Well, I mean, at this point, the Nobel Peace Prize has become a joke. It's a gold thing that's handed out to the warmongers to convince you that you should listen to this person and pay no attention to these over here. Listen to the global warming scientist. He's got awards and plaques, and he's been on TV. And don't listen to the people who are talking about the snow and ice, because they just drive the snow plow. How the heck would they know? Yeah,
right. But I thought it just bitterly ironic that these people would be honored, and yet people who actually have been working and continue to work for peace on this planet are just getting ignored.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a joke when they gave the Peace Prize to Obama. It was a joke when they gave it to Al Gore. They gave it to the group that Al Gore was representing. Right. Gore himself did not win the Nobel Peace Prize. He likes to claim that he did. But he was just there as the representative of the group who got it. But still, what has global warming got to do with peace in the first place?
Hello.
I mean, Alfred Nobel's got to be spinning in his grave right now.
At warp speed, I'm sure.
Yes.
You know what we ought to do at What Really Happened, dear?
What we ought to do?
I think we ought to establish our own What Really Happened Peace Prize.
I think that's a good idea.
For people who are actually, they may be doing it quietly on the sidelines, but there are a lot of good people out there who are really working for a more peaceful, a more pleasant place where people can live and work in peace and without risk of being attacked by war.
Aaron Watada, Ann Wright, Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, there's a huge list of people out there who are not being honored because they will not kowtow to the money junkies' war machine.
And they will not support the corporate narrative.
No.
Yeah, I hear you. Well,
I want to nominate you for a What Really Happened Peace Prize.
Thank you, dear. I'd nominate you, but let's expand it outside the family.
I think we ought to do that.
And in a perfectly predictable manner, North Korea has rejected the UN resolution against it and vows stronger self-defense measures. North Korea's foreign minister said on Thursday it rejects the latest UN Security Council resolution imposing fresh sanctions against the country for its September nuclear test, saying it's being denied sovereignty and the right to survival. The North Korean ministry said in a statement that the country will now be taking a stronger self-defense measure in response to the resolution.
Which probably explains why they had that huge artillery training exercise, 90 howitzers.
I mean, this is
a lot of howitzers.
Palm to forehead moment. I mean, congrats, UN, for creating sanctions which are pushing North Korea into the polar opposite direction from where you say you want them to go. Smooth move. What needs to happen, what the UN, South Korea, Japan, China, and the U.S. should be doing, Mike, at this point, is getting Kim Jong-un and the North Korean government back to the negotiating table, negotiate in good faith, and present a real peace treaty to replace the existing armistice, which guarantees freedom of trade in exchange for North Korea stopping their nuclear weapons program and becoming a signatory to the NNPT.
The problem here, unfortunately,
this is logical.
Yeah. So the problem here is that everybody has to agree to have peace.
Yeah.
It takes only one person to get out there and destroy that peace and lead to war. Mm-hmm. And our government, the U.S. government right now, there are way too many people who see a major global war as their best way out of this mess that they've made over the last half century in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's scary, and it's very frustrating to me that logic and the resolution of geopolitical differences don't seem to have a good ongoing relationship, particularly regarding the United States.
Well, it makes sense if you look at it from their point of view. If you ignore what you're being told in the media about Assad as a terrible dictator and Saddam had nuclear weapons,
right,
and you realize what the real agenda is, which was conquest and theft of other people's wealth, it does, in a very sick, twisted way, actually make sense. Mm-hmm. The problem we're all dealing with right now is the U.S. government as a whole has overcommitted down this path that Wesley Clark blew the whistle on.
Yeah.
They can't just quit and say we were wrong and turn around without our economy imploding immediately. So their mindset is victory or death, as long as it's somebody else's death.
Yeah.
And they're going to push on through. And ultimately, especially with the new revelations coming out about the Zumwalt and all these other weapon systems, where even the Pentagon's top tester is saying these two new classes of littoral combat ships have zero chance of being able to carry out a 30-day mission because of all the problems with them. We're going to lose this next war.
Yeah.
And I don't want our next generation of children to inherit the collective guilt of what the United States government has done, the way the German people were forced to suffer the collective guilt for what had happened under the Nazis, even though it happened before they were even alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I would spare our next generation that sorrow.
Right. Another little note about the UN. Apparently, it has apologized for cholera spreading in Haiti, but not for causing it, which it did. Apparently, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon apologized Thursday for the U.S. not doing enough to contain the spread of a cholera outbreak in Haiti, but he stopped short of apologizing for bringing the disease to the Caribbean nation. Ban made his remarks in a speech announcing the UN's new approach to cholera in Haiti, which seeks to provide aid to communities affected by the disease, which has affected about 800,000 Haitians. That's a huge number, Mike, and killed over 9,000. On behalf of the United Nations, I want to say very clearly we apologize to the Haitian people. We simply did not do enough with regard to the cholera outbreak and its spread in Haiti. We are profoundly sorry for his role, Ban said, speaking first in Creole, then repeating himself in French and English. This has cast a shadow upon the relationship between the UN and the people of Haiti.
Well, right now, I imagine the people of Haiti are pretty much angry with everybody, the Clinton Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at the so-called assistance that went down there to Haiti following that horrendous earthquake, it all wound up buying up land for pennies on the dollar for development as new tourist resorts. It's almost like somebody had a plan to literally erase the Haitian people from Haiti and, build a new tropical island casino paradise down there or something.
Well, what happened was that the people who were the patient zeros were from a peacekeeping mission from Tibet. That's how it started. And so apparently the UN's military can spread disease with impunity, with the UN never being liable for prosecution? I mean, that is so sick and twisted, I can't even begin to talk about it, you know?
You know, I got to wonder why the United Nations spent the money to bring people from Tibet all the way around the globe to Haiti in the first place.
Yep.
It almost seems like it was intentional to bring these people with these illnesses into Haiti, just like we're seeing all these refugees and illegal immigrants come across our border carrying highly contagious diseases that had previously been eradicated in this country. Is the medical industrial complex that desperate for business that they actually want to start some pandemics?
You never know, but it's a scary thought.
It is.
It's a really scary thought. And there have been all sorts of lawsuits to which the UN has said, I mean, all over the place, in South America, in the United States, but they've all been shut down. They've not been allowed to go forward.
We have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I was just looking at the weather radar, and apparently on the north part of Oahu, up by the Polynesian Cultural Center, they're under some serious rain and thunder showers. But so far here, we still got a little bit of sun and haze and cloud and just a little bit of misting out there. What is your next story?
Well, this is from an address that was given by CENTCOM Commander. U.S. must keep troops in Afghanistan to, quote-unquote, send a strong message. Speaking at the Foreign Policy Initiatives Forum yesterday, General Joseph Votel, the head of Central Command, praised President Obama for not following through on planned drawdowns of troops in occupied Afghanistan, saying he wants to keep troop levels at least this high for the foreseeable future. General Votel argued that keeping 8,400 troops in Afghanistan more or less permanently was a very wise move, and that it would send a strong message to the people of Afghanistan that the U.S. believes its military strategy is working.
No, the message they're sending to Afghanistan is you're not allowed to run your own country anymore, and we're going to stay here as long as there is oil and opium to get sucked out.
Yeah, you know, in reading this, all I could wonder was, has this gentleman gone absolutely barking mad and lost his reality license to make such a statement in public? And were I able to invite this guy over for tea, and I sincerely doubt he would accept the invitation, Rivero, I would have to ask him point blank, just what are the metrics to which he could point, which indicate 15 years on, and with the Taliban taking on more and more territory on a daily basis, that the U.S. strategy is actually working. And as you said, the only element right now for whom this tactic is working is the burgeoning Afghani opium trade. And
the pipeline.
Yeah.
That's what this regime change in Afghanistan was all about back in the 1990s.
Yep.
A group of oil companies wanted to run a pipeline across Afghanistan. They talked to the Taliban, and the Taliban said the pipeline right-of-way will cost X. And the oil companies didn't want to spend X. They wanted to pay only Y. So they went before Congress and said a new, more business-friendly, oil company-friendly regime was needed in Afghanistan, and that was the root of the invasion of Afghanistan. Now, one of the people who went before Congress was the representative of Unocal Oil, Hamid Karzai, who eventually was installed as the president of the newly conquered Afghanistan. And, I mean, that's what it was really all about, an oil pipeline right-of-way and restoring Afghanistan's opium trade, because the Taliban had shut it down completely, and all the drug lords here in the United States of America, especially those in the CIA, they've been cut off from the opium from Vietnam. Now they're cut off from the opium coming from Afghanistan, and they needed a supply to keep in business, and that's what this war was all about. And we have photos of U.S. and coalition forces guarding and protecting the opium poppy fields and actually handling those sacks of raw opium.
Yeah, it's pretty grim. And I wish every American citizen had the opportunity to see those images, because if you think that our soldiers, and I have tremendous respect for our American men and women in military uniform, but that our soldiers are being used in this way, if you saw those images, you would really, really get angry. This is not about protecting the United States. It's not about protecting the American way of life. It's all about private profit.
Oil and opium.
Yeah.
That's what's driving it. Or in the case of Central America, cocaine.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, and this comes to us from antiwar.com, which is a very sober site, and along with reading What Really Happened, I encourage people to pop on over there as well. The Pentagon, again, is underreporting civilians killed in Iraq and Syrian airstrikes. The latest in the occasional Pentagon statements on civilian deaths in the air wars in Iraq and Syria has claimed 54 civilians slain between March 31st and October 22nd, continuing the trend of official figures being massively lower than those reported by the local media. This puts the official death toll at 173 civilians for the entire air war.
All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before I turn this microphone back over to Claire, during the commercial, I was watching the Fox News feed here, and they're talking about how the Syrian government and the Russians are making tremendous gains in Aleppo. And the talking head had this comment, the fall of Aleppo seems inevitable. And right there, that tells you which side the U.S. and its corporate media have been on. Mm-hmm. That of the hired terrorists trying to overthrow the legitimate government of Syria. Because otherwise they'd say Aleppo's on the verge of liberation.
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting how that got put.
You know, and they're also covering the referendum in Italy. They're calling it Italy's Brexit. And apparently they're all screaming that if the no camp wins the referendum, the banks are going to crash and so forth and so on. And Italy's prime minister is now saying he's going to resign. It's an ugly situation. Your next story would be?
The UN is reporting that Iraq troop deaths are soaring with the Mosul invasion. Between Iraq's military militias and the Kurdish Peshmerga, some 50,000 troops have invaded the area around Mosul to take it back from the rebels. The Peshmerga is reporting that they lost a large hunk of fighters by themselves, with 1,600 killed and over 10,000 wounded since late October. That, of course, is only a fraction of the overall death toll for the month of November, as some 2,227 ISIS fighters have also been killed. Among civilians, the UN only counted 926 killed, but the figure is actually several hundred higher, with the UN continuing to exclude deaths in Anbar from their official figure. All told,
those Anbarians don't count. Yeah.
And all told, that puts the death toll right now at 5,719 for Iraq in November, which is roughly in line with October. The November figures show a six-fold increase in Iraqi troop deaths, with ISIS casualties on the decline. And these horrific numbers are President Bush's legacy of the war and occupation of Iraq.
Yeah, the U.S. government's just made a mess of the world.
Yeah.
They have. And I think in the future, history books are going to say this was World War III. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, it looks like Trump is going to pull the plug on this. Apparently, during one of his speeches he made on part of his thank you tour, he said he's going to end the era of the U.S. toppling other people's governments. And I think that would be a big, big thing to accomplish.
Yes.
And give everybody a chance to rebuild their lives. Again, when you look at the caliber of people who have dominated our government for the last 30 years, these are people tied up with the drug trade. And when you realize that degree of criminality, you come to understand that they're going to do what they want to do, and they don't care who gets harmed.
Yeah.
Just like a regular street drugs dealer, he doesn't care if you overdose and die. He doesn't care if you have to rob a store to buy his or her product. It doesn't care if you wind up going to jail because of it. It's just all about the money and peddling the drugs. Mm-hmm. And when people like that acquire political power, which happened after Iran-Contra, they just operate the same way. They've done very well for themselves, and look what devastation they have done to the planet around them. It's just like when drugs come into a neighborhood and you see the entire neighborhood decline. We're seeing the same thing on a national and indeed global scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Interesting little tidbit. The Obama administration is stiff-arming lawmakers questioning secret refugee deal with Australia. And nearly 2,500 refugees from terrorism hotspots around the world are bound for the U.S. after being rejected by Australia. But not even top lawmakers can get answers about who the heck they are.
I mean, if you think about it very, very quick, Australia is a country that was started by prison convicts, mm-hmm. and they think these refugees are too dangerous to let in.
Yeah.
And yet Obama's going to open the gate and let them pour on through.
And they're bound to the U.S. They were rejected by Australia, but top lawmakers can't get straight answers about who they are. And in an unprecedented move, the U.S. State Department has classified details on these refugees to be resettled in America via a secret deal made with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, called a one-off, as classified.
So, okay, so we have all these people who originated in these terror hotspots filled with people who hate the U.S. government. They couldn't get into Australia. They're coming here to the United States of America, and the U.S. government is classifying their identities so that police cannot find and keep an eye on these people. This is probably the worst abuse of classification ever since 9/11 itself, when the U.S. government classified the evidence that the dancing Israelis were linked to 9/11 itself. Are they planning a new 9/11 that's going to involve all of these terrorist refugees? Are they the next false flag? They're going to blow up bombs all across the country? And is that why the U.S. government is protecting them?
I don't know. Now, I have posted many times about the horrific conditions on Nauru, which a lot of these people and their kids are being held. It is a black eye against the core Australian values of freedom and compassion, and I kind of asked out loud for at least a little degree of sympathy for the children who had no choice but to follow their parents. And I advocated for the Australian government to consider partnering with various international adoption agencies. Because you look at some of these kids, you see the brightness, they're cute, they could get adopted into loving homes that could give them hope and a future. But the fact that Obama did this with his normal graceless hubris, essentially bypassing Congress, does give me a pause for concern. And, Mike, I have to ask the question, how great is the vetting these people are going to get, considering that the Somali immigrant refugee Abdul Razak Ali Artan, who stabbed a bunch of college students recently at Ohio State University, was also vetted by this very same U.S. government, which concluded that he was of utterly no risk to the American public.
Going on. The Australians have already vetted him and said, these people are dangerous, we're not going to let them in. So if Obama is letting them in, clearly he's bypassing the vetting process. It's insane. Are they trying to smuggle a terrorist army into this country before Donald Trump can take office?
But it's scary, the absolute lack of responsibility and lack of accountability that this administration has demonstrated through the past 8 years. It's really
even
awful.
more than that, it may be, the establishment as a whole, they don't want Donald Trump in the White House. They're doing everything that they can to keep him out. There's still Hail Mary pass at this Electoral College nonsense. But if Trump is inaugurated in January, I think what we're seeing is they're setting up for him to fail spectacularly. I mean, all this propaganda in the corporate media about how the U.S. economy is wonderful and Obama's done a really great job and Donald Trump's inheriting this wonderful economy so that when it does come apart, they can say, oh, well, we handed him a great economy. Look how bad this outsider Donald Trump just messed it up, and it proves we should never have anybody but professional politicians in the political elite. And this could be another situation, bringing all these violent people in. Donald Trump's going to have to be dealing with this epidemic of domestic terrorism, and the corporate media is going to say, oh, see, Donald Trump, he can't keep you safe, he can't keep you protected. It looks like they're out to sabotage the Trump presidency so that he's a single-term president and Hillary can run again in 2020, or somebody else. I mean, if Hillary's brain has melted before then. But it's all about the establishment reasserting its control and slapping down the American people and say, don't you dare think that any one of you could ever be president. That whole thing about anyone can be president of the United States, that's just a lie we tell you to keep you involved here. You have to be one of the elites. You have to be part of the CIA's narcocracy, before you can even, and you have to sell your soul to Israel before you can even dare to dream of holding any kind of an elected office.
Yeah, absolutely. There has been a very interesting charge against the Saudi government by a gentleman who is currently in Gitmo. And he's charging that the Saudi Arabia's terrorist rehab facility is actually a secret radicalization program. And this guy is an accused al-Qaeda bomb maker detained at Gitmo. And he has claimed, because he was talking to the parole board at Gitmo, you guys want to send me back to Saudi Arabia because you believe that there is a de-radicalization program. Well, on the surface, maybe. But make no mistake, underneath there is a hidden radicalization program. Now, this place is called the Prince Mohammed bin Naif Counseling and Care Center in Riyadh, and it claims that it's deactivating jihadists through a 12-step program to help them reintegrate with society.
So if you don't blow up a school bus for a week, you get a little plastic tag?
A little participation plan, you know. But apparently the Crown Prince is looking to, according to this gentleman, recruit these men away from pure jihad to working for the state of Saudi Arabia. Now, Mike, if in fact these accusations prove to be true, it's really time for the U.S. government to cut loose from its geopolitical frenemy. The damage this country has done to the Middle East and beyond by embracing a very violent Wahhabist interpretation of the Quran and Hadith has been incalculable. I mean, you take a look at the devastation in Yemen. Children who are starving to death, children who are getting mowed down in Saudi military operations. Are these really our friends? I mean, come on.
Well, you know, they're thugs, but there are thugs. I mean,
Yeah.
the same thing with Qatar.
Yeah.
And, again, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have been tied together economically going back to the petrodollar deal, following Richard Nixon's ending of gold convertibility for the U.S. Federal Reserve note. And the reality is Saudi Arabia grew rich off the petrodollar deal. They're in economic trouble now because of the U.S. oil price war against Russia. But they still have huge amounts of investments in this country, which buys them a lot of leverage. Now, certainly Israel would like to find a way to break off relations between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has influence because they're pouring money into our country, as opposed to Israel, which is
grabbing it out,
trying to maintain control and influence even as it sucks this country dry.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of this Saudi Arabia attacks and bashing and accusation can be traced back to Israel, which definitely wants to make us enemies. And I remember somebody once said a quote that, Israel is our only friend in the Middle East. That's funny because before Israel was created, the U.S. didn't have any enemies in the Middle East.
Yep.
And today we're in this polarized world where supposedly Israel is our only friend, but Israel goes out to turn everybody into enemies of each other. And I can't think of a better example of that than Israel's attack on the USS Liberty, trying to sink the ship and blame Egypt for it to make Egypt and the United States enemies. That's how it gets done. And we know that certainly when 9/11 happened, there was a tremendous effort to blame Saudi Arabia for it, which kind of fell apart. But this is how Israel likes to operate. Create an atrocity and blame somebody for it in order to destroy diplomatic relations so that the U.S. is dependent on Israel for any influence in the Middle East.
Yeah. It's nasty. I'd like to also spend a little bit more time regarding Syria. And it came from blacklistednews.com, another resource that is usually pretty clear and clean and sober, and I would urge our readers and listeners to think about bobbing over there once in a while. And the title of this article is "The Battle for Aleppo is Over. Now the Real War has Begun." And apparently within hours of the news that Sunni militant resistance in eastern Aleppo had collapsed, the U.S. House passed House Bill number 5732, authorizing an investigation into creating a no-fly zone over Syria. In other words, the U.S. House is looking for ways to start a hot war in Syria with Russia. Now, this could just be more impotent saber-rattling by a fading group of backbencher conservatives. Think Lindsey Graham and John McCain. But it's something that needs to be looked at and paid attention to all the way. The goal of this no-fly zone is to implement the Plan B strategy to break Syria up to balkanize it into two separate countries. Then they can create some form of Greater Kurdistan across parts of Syria, Iraq, Iran, and eastern Turkey. Now, Russia's deployment of S-300 and S-400 missile defense systems around Syria and delivering them to Iran is an important countermove to squelch this plan. Now, we at What Really Happened have mentioned many times the possibility of an outgoing Obama administration gifting President-elect Trump with one, if not two wars, before he's even had the opportunity to take the oath of office. And Mike, I think you would agree with me that the time right now between now and the 20th of January, when Trump does take the oath of office, is one of the most critically dangerous times in the history of this country.
I would agree. Now, Russia and China are showing restraint because they understand things are about to change in the U.S. I would hope that Iran would back off their anger over Congress passing the extension of the sanctions, understanding that when Donald Trump comes into office, that he may have a change of heart about the P5+1 deal there as well. We already know that Trump has changed his mind about torture, basically because in his interview of General Matisse came on out and said, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, give me some cigarettes and a couple of six-packs of beer and I'll do better.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think Trump may reevaluate that. I think Trump needs, and again, my concerns about Trump, he's a reactionary president. He's a populist president, very much like Jimmy Carter was. And just like Jimmy Carter, too much of Trump's worldview is based on what he's been seeing in the corporate media all during his life.
Right.
And he needs one of his advisors to come up and just say, Donald, everything that was on that newspaper page, everything that was on that TV screen, everything that came out of that radio, it was all a lot of nonsense, and you need to go back and find out for yourself what's really going on. The issue with Iran is simply this. Iran kept their side of the P5+1 agreement. It is the United States that's in violation of international law. And remember, Iran has not launched a war of conquest in over 200 years.
Right.
Let's make peace with them. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment on this Pauhana Friday, and you had one more story you wanted to do.
Yes, the bill targeting alleged Russian propaganda, bring on the borscht for us, passes.
Bring on
in
the
House.
vodka.
Yes. Apparently, H.R. 6393, Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2017, passed in the House of Representatives on November 30th. The legislation deals with a number of intelligence-related issues, including Russian propaganda, or what the government calls propaganda. Section 501 calls for the government to counter measures by Russia to exert covert influence carried out in coordination with or at the behest of political leaders or the security services of the Russian Federation, and the role of the Russian Federation has been hidden or not acknowledged publicly. Definitions include media manipulation, covert broadcasting, disinformation, and forgeries.
Because that's all the U.S. government's job, you know.
Funding agents of influence.
Yes.
And it's easy to see how this law, it passed by the Senate and signed by the President, could be used against alleged fake news websites.
Including this one. I'm on the Washington Post list. And, you know, I'm going to hurl the defy here. I dare anybody to show a canceled check to me, to What Really Happened, that originated anywhere inside Russia. It doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't. And, you know, this is desperation on the cusp of madness by this government. And I would be laughing my head off at the insanity of this characterization of the site, as well as others who've been tarred. And I would also like to politely remind our readers and listeners, that the U.S. government and corporate prostitutes lied about Afghanistan and Iraq in order to justify wars against them. To date, these wars are ongoing with absolutely zero metric one can point to as a military win for either conflict.
So this whole thing about this war on Russian propaganda, or the war on the independent media, as I mentioned earlier in the show, it's really a war on skepticism and doubt.
Right.
Because this government, thinking back to that story about Franklin Roosevelt and the whoppers he was telling in 1941 to get us prepared to go to war, This government controls us through lies, fraud, and deception. They don't know any other way to do it. And whenever anybody stands up and says, you're wrong, you made a mistake, you're flat out lying, oh, it's fake news, it's heresy, it's all this terrible thing. We just put up an article from Washington's blog. Fake news has been a problem for thousands of years, and here how it's been stopped. And they go down all these people in history who were accused of spreading fake news. Socrates.
Yep.
In 399 BC. William Tyndale, the guy who translated the Bible into English so you could read it for yourself and not have to rely on the clergy to tell you what it meant. Then there was Galileo, was tortured for spreading fake news. I mean, that's what's going on. The book burnings by the Nazis, and today this attack on the independent media is the digital equivalent of the Nazi book burning. And they've got a hard sell because too many people know about all the lies they've been fed by the corporate media and the government. And that's a heck of a thing for them to overcome.
Yes.
Anyway, there's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here and have a relaxing afternoon waiting for the storms to come on in. Have a good weekend. Remember, you are all part of the independent media. Take what you learn here. Share it with everybody that you know. Be gentle, one little fact at a time. Don't overwhelm them and throw them into a panic so that they run to their safe room and play with the Play-Doh. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.